There are 3 Polaroid photos in the top drawer of my desk. I'm in all 3 of them. I didn't ask anyone to take those pictures. And the camera that took them stopped working when I was 12. My grandmother used to say, some things stop working for the living because they have work left to do for the dead. I thought it was dementia. I was wrong. If stories like this pull at something inside you, hit subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. I want to know how far this Polaroid can reach. This started 3 weeks ago. Or maybe it started much earlier. I just wasn't paying attention. My grandmother was Beatrice Alden, though the neighborhood called her B. She died 6 months ago, 84, a stroke that felt like somebody closed a door midway through a sentence. I didn't make it to the hospital in time. I was on the freeway, watching brake lights smear red across rain, while her last voicemail waited on my phone like a small, patient animal. B raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. She was practical the way old farmhouses are practical, creaking, sturdy, always holding. Her house sits on the edge of Hudson Valley, a white-sided colonial revival with a sagging porch and 2 stubborn oak trees that claw at the sky. Inside, it smells faintly of lavender and mothballs. The grandfather clock in the hall chimes every hour, soft at noon, hollow at 3 in the morning. When I was a kid, it was a living place, pie cooling on the sill, mittens drying near the vent, her humming mixing with the sound of wind in the gutters. Now the rooms feel like a museum of time itself, every object labeled by memory instead of glass. I told myself I came back to clean and sell. That's what my emails to the attorney said. That's what I told my boss. But I've been sleeping here since I arrived. I keep inventing reasons, waiting for a contractor, checking the roof, organizing the attic, but the truth is simpler, leaving would feel like abandoning her twice. On the 5th night I found the camera. It was folded in a napkin at the back of her dresser, like a relic or a delicate bruise, a Polaroid 1-step 600, beige fading toward a jaundiced yellow, the red shutter button stubborn as a poppy in snow. I remembered the weight before I remembered the shape. Summer of 2006, B carried it everywhere. She photographed the sun on the kitchen floor, the neighbor's cat pretending to ignore birds, the garden after rain, and me, always me, mouth full of cereal, scab on knee, hair sticking up in 12 directions. She'd shake each photo gently and say, "Let it breathe," as if images needed air the way cakes need to cool. She pinned the best ones to the fridge with apple magnets that left little rust circles on the white. One photo remains in my mind, B and me on the porch steps, her laughing at something we forgot later. I asked why she wouldn't use a digital camera. She said, "Digital doesn't capture the soul of things," in a tone that made me realize she wasn't joking. By 2008 the Polaroid had given up. I offered to fix it with the confidence of a 13-year-old who had recently soldered 2 wires and survived. She put her hand over mine. "It's not broken," she said. "It's just waiting." I thought she meant for new film. Now I'm not so sure. That first night back, I set the Polaroid on the nightstand beside the guest bed. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like a lighthouse for whatever part of me still believed objects can hold people. Maybe because sleeping without it felt like locking a door on her. Either way, I slept with the camera watching. October 30th, 2025. The house had that metallic chill that makes wood speak. I spent the day in the attic sorting boxes labeled in VEA's tidy slant, aprons, letters, taxes, Christmas lights, don't plug I in. I found recipe cards freckled with grease, a jar of buttons separated by color like candy, and albums I couldn't open yet. Dinner was rubbered lasagna and silence. I turned off the TV because voices that weren't hers felt like a lie. At 11:47 p.m. I lay on the guest bed. The moon pushed a pale square onto the wall. The window was open a finger width, the curtain breathed in and out the way sleeping animals do. I picked up the camera, pointed it at my face, and pressed the red button. Nothing. Not a click. Not a stubborn whine. I put it back and turned off the lamp. The dark felt deep enough to swim. Sleep came in small, broken bowls. I dreamed of the old hymn she hummed when I was sick, "Bring the wandering home," and stairs that led up and up until they turned into a ladder, then into light. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the house shifted its weight like a large creature settling. Then I heard it. A mechanical exhale, intimate as a whisper. It came from the nightstand. I sat up too fast, the room tilted. My phone said 3:47 a.m. The blue glow made the edges of things look cut out. A square lay face down on the floor beside the bed. I picked it up. The border was damp, as if the picture had sweated. Warm. I turned it over. Me. Asleep. Taken from directly above, as though someone had been standing on the ceiling. My mouth slightly open, the blanket pulled to my chest. Moonlight braided across the sheets. At the bottom, in faint gray, October 31st, 2025, 3:33 a.m. The door was shut. The window latched. The ceiling a plain, indifferent plane. The Polaroid sat exactly where I'd left it, innocent as a paperweight. I touched it. The plastic burned my fingers. Something that had been waiting for 17 years had decided I was finally paying attention. I spent the rest of that night trying to convince myself it was a dream. Maybe my brain had stitched fragments of sound and memory into something too real to question. Maybe I'd picked up an old photo and imagined the warmth. But dreams don't leave fingerprints. Dreams don't leave film cartridges that shouldn't exist. When the sun finally reached the windows, it felt sickly and thin, a kind of light that doesn't warm anything. I hadn't slept. I walked through the house with the Polaroid clutched like a relic. Every floorboard complained under my feet. The kitchen smelled of coffee grounds and dust. The photograph sat on the table beneath the overhead light, a crime scene in beige and gray. It looked ordinary now, grainy, imperfect. But the timestamp still burned faintly in silver, October 31st, 2025, 3:33 a.m. I ran my finger across the ink. It was smooth, not printed, not stamped. It looked like it had grown there. I tried to think logically. Maybe there was an internal clock in the cartridge that still worked after 20 years. That didn't even make sense. The rational part of me was beginning to sound ridiculous, and the irrational part was wide awake. I decided to check the house again. Front door, locked. Windows, sealed. Basement, empty, except for the faint smell of mildew and oil. Attic, still full of boxes. Nothing disturbed. The silence inside those rooms didn't feel peaceful anymore, it felt deliberate, like something holding its breath. Back in the kitchen, I stared at the photograph again. My gaze drifted to the bottom right corner. At first, it looked like a smudge, an imperfection in the film. But as I tilted it under the light, the blur took shape, the curve of a shoulder, the faint outline of a head. Someone, or something, had been standing near the bed. I flipped it face down. The silence cracked open for a moment as a branch scraped across the outside wall. I jumped. My pulse stuttered. The house returned to stillness, and I laughed weakly at myself. But I didn't flip the photo back over. Instead, I reached for the camera. The Polaroid sat heavy in my hands, warmer than it should have been. I pressed the latch and opened the back. The faint hiss of air felt alive, like a sigh escaping something that had been holding it for too long. Inside was a Polaroid 600 cartridge, white plastic, smooth, unblemished. 7 photos left. On the back, faded letters read, "Use before March 2007. That wasn't possible. B hadn't bought film since before smartphones existed. Film expired like milk, dried out, became useless. Yet here it was, fresh, full, and functional. The camera gave a small click when I closed the hatch, like it was confirming something to itself. I froze, waiting. Nothing followed, but the air had shifted. It felt thicker, heavier, as if someone else had entered the room and was pretending to breathe when I did. I looked toward the hallway. At the far end stood Bea's bedroom door. It had been shut since the funeral. The brass handle was slightly tarnished, reflecting the faint yellow of morning light. I'd avoided that room for 3 weeks. Her urn was inside. I wasn't ready to face her absence in that form. But now, there was a pull, subtle but insistent, like gravity reassigning its loyalties. I walked slowly. Each step made the old wood groan under my weight. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered above the knob. "It's not broken," she had said. "It's just waiting." I turned the handle. The smell hit first, lavender, soft and clean, followed by the faint sweetness of furniture polish. The room looked exactly as she'd left it, bed perfectly made, pillows aligned, sunlight filtering through curtains patterned with faded violets. Her glasses sat folded on the dresser. Beside them, her jewelry box glimmered faintly, the same one I used to sneak into to watch the ballerina spin. And there, on the far side of the dresser, next to the urn, lay 3 unopened film boxes, wrapped neatly with twine. Expired. 2006, 2007. The handwriting on the labels was hers, "Do not use unless necessary." Next to them was a small, worn notebook, brown leather, edges frayed like an old leaf. The front cover bore a single word in her careful cursive, "For record." I sat on the bed. The mattress sighed beneath me, releasing the faint smell of lavender and thyme. The notebook opened stiffly, its spine reluctant to give. Inside, the handwriting was cramped, small, not diary-like but scientific, an experiment log. June 15, 2006. Bought new Polaroid 1 step. Took photos of garden. Normal results. June 22. Took photo of hallway. When developed, a dark shape near door. Probably shadow. Uneasy. June 30th. Photo of mitten sleeping. In image, eyes open, looking at something unseen. My pulse quickened. I kept reading. August 12th. Tried night shots. Photos reveal things invisible to the eye. Reflections. Faces. Need more evidence. September 5th. Researched, spirit photography. Originated 19th century. Mostly frauds, but not all. October 20th. Camera might capture energy between worlds. A bridge, not lens. Residual presence responding to attention. And then one final entry stopped me cold. December 3, 2007. Took photo of myself sleeping. Someone behind me. Male figure. Think it's Arthur. Not afraid. Comforted. Arthur. My grandfather. Dead since 1998. The last entry was dated March 14, 2008. Won't use camera again. Not fear, understanding. He's here. Don't need proof. Will keep safe for when needed again. For when needed again. Needed for what? Or for who? The air grew cold, enough that I could see a faint fog when I exhaled. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it had texture, like velvet stretched too tight. I closed the notebook slowly, hands trembling. The house gave a low, hollow sound, as though something large had shifted its weight in the walls. Down the hall, the grandfather clock struck 10. Each chime echoed longer than it should have. I whispered, "Grandma." No answer. Only the faint, rhythmic tick-tock of time continuing, indifferent to who was listening. I don't remember walking back to my room, but I must have, because when I looked up again, I was sitting on the edge of the bed with the notebook on my lap and the Polaroid in my hand. The air had changed, it felt weighted, as if the house itself was aware that something had been discovered. The first photograph lay beside me on the nightstand. Its white border caught the lamp's faint glow. That dark mark in the corner seemed darker now, like it had grown with the passing hours. The clock said 4:38 a.m. The kind of hour that doesn't belong to night or morning, only to waiting. I rubbed my eyes, leaned closer to the photo, and whispered, "You're just shadows, that's all." But my voice didn't sound convinced. From the kitchen drawer, I had brought up BEA's magnifying glass, the one she used for crossword puzzles and sewing. I held it over the image. The grain resolved into edges, then into the faint shape of a human outline. Not clear enough to be a person, but not random enough to be light. A trick of the mind, maybe. Pareidolia. I wanted to laugh. I almost did. But something in me decided to breathe slower instead. The air pressure shifted. My ears popped softly. And then, the sound sliced through the silence like a blade through fabric. I froze. The Polaroid was sitting on the nightstand again, still, innocent, except for the thin white rectangle slowly emerging from its mouth. I didn't move. Couldn't. The motor purred one last whir, and the photo dropped gently to the wooden floor. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, fast, shallow, ragged. Then the clock downstairs chimed once. I flinched like it had shouted. When I finally reached for the photo, my hand trembled so badly that it brushed against the nightstand and sent dust swirling like smoke. The photo was still warm. I turned it over. My stomach twisted. It was me, again. Same angle. Straight from above. But this time, my eyes were open. I was staring directly upward, straight into the lens. My mouth was closed, expression blank, almost peaceful, like a corpse waiting to be named. The timestamp, October 31st, 2025, 4:33 a.m. I grabbed my phone. The screen flared painfully bright. 4:41 a.m. I hadn't been here at 4:33. I'd been in BEA's room, holding the notebook. Which meant this photo wasn't showing what had happened. It was showing what was going to happen. I sat there, shaking. The radiator hissed quietly, like it was whispering through its teeth. "What do you want me to see?" I murmured. No answer. I flipped through the notebook again, scanning the entries until my thumb hit one near the end, a line written in shakier handwriting than the rest. October 8, 2007, the camera doesn't capture what's here. It captures intention, presence with purpose. If something wants to be seen, it will appear. If it wants to speak, the photograph delivers the message. I read it twice, 3 times, until the words started to blur. Presence with purpose. Something wanted to be seen. I looked around the room. The window glass reflected faint movement, mine, maybe, or something behind me. The Polaroid sat where I'd placed it, quiet now. Its lens stared toward the bed. My throat was dry. "If it wants to talk," I whispered, "then talk." The floor groaned behind me. Not the normal house sound, sharper, more deliberate. I turned fast. Nothing. Just my shadow stretching long against the dresser. I exhaled, realizing I was still clutching the camera. My thumb brushed the shutter. "Fine," I muttered. "Let's see what you want to show." I lifted the Polaroid and aimed it toward the mirror on the opposite wall. The mirror caught my reflection in pieces, lamp glow, tremor of hands, hollow eyes. "Show me." The sound felt alive now. The motor's vibration pulsed through my palms like a heartbeat. I held the print as it slid out. The chemical smell hit instantly, sharp, ghostly, metallic. Slowly, shapes began to bloom in the square, shadows first, then color. The mirror appeared, my reflection holding the camera, exactly as I was. But I wasn't alone. Behind me stood B. Her figure was faint at first, as if the film couldn't decide whether to let her through. Then she solidified, smiling softly, eyes kind. Her reflection wasn't the frail, hospital version I remember. This was her, alive in the way memories are, warm, humming, bright at the edges. One hand rested lightly on my shoulder. The other held a folded piece of paper. I turned around instantly. The space behind me was empty. The air, though, had changed. It smelled strongly of lavender again, almost overwhelming, like the moment before a storm when the air feels charged but sweet. I looked back at the photograph. B was still there. Still smiling. The paper in her hand was tilted just enough for me to see faint writing on it. I lifted the magnifying glass. Through the distortion of the lens, I could read only fragments. When you open it, you'll see. I lowered the glass. My pulse pounded in my ears. Open what? The photo trembled between my fingers. For the first time, I felt something like anger beneath the fear, a desperate frustration that came from not understanding. I whispered, "You're not gone, are you?" The lamp flickered once. Then again. The bulb hummed faintly, a tone that almost sounded like breathing. The camera, still in my hand, grew warm again. Its red shutter button glowed faintly in the dim light, a heartbeat made of plastic and power. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Then, almost without deciding to, I said, "Show me where." The wind outside rose suddenly, rattling the old glass panes with a noise like fingernails. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed once, out of sync with time. My fingers tightened on the camera's grip. I didn't know what was real anymore, the photos, the smells, the sound of her voice echoing faintly in my mind. But one thought had settled inside me with the weight of truth. Whatever this was, B was guiding it. The fear I felt wasn't the kind that makes you run. It was the kind that roots you in place because you need to know how it ends. I turned toward the door. The hallway beyond looked darker than it should. The Polaroid's lens seemed to watch me as I stepped forward. The house felt different now. Not haunted exactly, listening. Every step I took on the old floorboard sounded answered by something distant, like footsteps following from behind the walls. The third photo sat on the bed, BEA's reflection still smiling at me from within it. The folded paper in her hand hadn't left my mind. She was trying to show me something. If the camera revealed intention, if it showed what wanted to be seen, then that paper existed somewhere in this house. And she wanted me to find it. I took a breath. The air carried lavender and static. "All right, Grandma," I whispered. "I'll play along." I checked drawers first. Nothing but old stationery, thread, a comb that still held a few strands of silver hair. Then the dresser, no letters. I even lifted the urn carefully, whispering, "Sorry," under my breath. Nothing underneath. The bed creaked when I crouched to look beneath it. Only boxes of sweaters wrapped in plastic. My chest tightened. I could feel frustration mixing with fear. The thought came suddenly, what if the paper isn't here? What if it's in the past, like everything else she's showing me? The camera sat on the nightstand, angled toward the doorway like an expectant pet. Its red shutter glowed faintly again, a pulse in the dark. I glanced down the hall. The attic door waited at the top of the stairs, a narrow square of shadow. I didn't want to go up there. But the pull was too strong now. The steps groaned under my weight. Dust lifted and swirled through the flashlight beam like snow in amber. At the top, the air turned cold. The attic always had that kind of cold that wasn't about temperature, more about memory. Like it held its breath for decades. Rows of boxes stretched into darkness, labeled in BEA's small handwriting. Linens. Taxes. Arthur's things. Photographs, family. That last one made my throat go dry. I dragged it out, brushing dust off the lid. The cardboard rasped beneath my hands. Inside were leather-bound albums stacked neatly, edges curled like old bark. The smell of paper and faint perfume hit me, lavender, always lavender. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor and opened the first album. Her life unfolded before me in still frames. B at 16, smiling with wildflowers in her hair. B on her wedding day, Arthur in uniform beside her, his eyes alive in a way mine had never been. B holding my mother as a baby. My parents holding me. Each page was a weight pressing into my chest, a life built, lost, and rebuilt, all preserved by light. Halfway through the third album, something slid free and landed in my lap. An envelope. No address, no stamps. Only one line written in ink faded almost to brown. For my grandson, when you understand. The handwriting was steady but weak, as if written with effort. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter, dated September 15, 2025, just a month before she died. I read aloud, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. My dear. If you're reading this, it means the Polaroid worked. It means you stayed in the house. It means you didn't run. I know you feel guilty. For the visits you didn't make, the calls you ignored, for not being here at the end. But I was never angry. You were building your own life, and that's what I wanted most. Don't punish yourself for living. The camera is special. Arthur gave it to me in 2006, when grief made me believe the world was ending. It showed me he wasn't gone. Not in body, but in memory. In energy. Love leaves fingerprints the world doesn't know how to erase. The Polaroid just happens to see them. When it stopped working in 2008, I knew it wasn't for me anymore. I'd made peace. I kept it safe because I knew one day you'd need it. You'd need to see proof that love doesn't die, it just changes rooms. It's working again because I want it to. There are things I need you to see. Not to frighten you, but to free you. Let it show you what it needs to. Trust it. Trust me. I'm here, my love. I always was. I always will be. Love, Grandma B. By the time I reached her name, my vision had blurred. Tears hit the paper, spreading the ink into thin rivers. The attic seemed smaller, warmer somehow. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it felt alive, like the house itself was exhaling. I whispered, you knew I'd come back. You planned all this, didn't you? The floorboards beneath me gave a slow creak, like something shifting closer. I didn't even flinch. For the first time in weeks, the fear that had lived behind my ribs softened. It wasn't gone, but it had changed shape. The camera, still hanging from my shoulder by its strap, gave a faint whir, a sound like a sigh. I turned it toward the floor instinctively, but no photo came out. The motor simply hummed once and fell quiet. Okay, I said softly. I understand. Show me the rest. I tucked the letter into my pocket and made my way down the attic stairs, each step echoing in the quiet. The smell of lavender followed me, faint, reassuring. When I reached the hall again, the clock downstairs struck 5. The sound traveled through the house like a heartbeat. 5 chimes. One for each night I had been here. All right, Grandma, I whispered as I entered the guest room. Show me. I lifted the camera, aimed it at the bed where I'd first seen myself sleeping, and pressed the red button. The sound filled the silence, mechanical but alive, like breathing through gears. The photo slid out and hung there for a second before falling into my hand. I watched the colors appear, slowly blooming like bruises. When the image came into focus, I stopped breathing. It was me. No, not me now. A small boy, maybe 6 years old, curled beneath a blanket, clutching a stuffed bear that had vanished decades ago. Beside him sat Bee, her hand stroking his hair, her face caught mid-hum, soft, patient, eternal. My throat closed. I remembered that night. I'd had a nightmare after hearing my parents fight downstairs. B came into the room, told me it was just thunder, even though the sky had been clear. She stayed until I fell asleep. The timestamp at the bottom read, July 15, 1999, 2:01 a.m. The Polaroid was showing me the past. I stared at it, unable to move. The longer I looked, the more it felt like the picture was breathing, the shadows shifting slightly, the boy's fingers twitching on the bear. I blinked, and it was still again. I swallowed hard. "All right, Grandma. I see it." The camera hummed faintly in response, its motor barely whispering, "Word," as if it approved. I lifted it again, same spot, same angle. My fingers trembled over the button. The second photo slipped out, the chemical scent sharp and metallic in the air. I waited. This time, the image revealed a teenager, 14, sitting on the same bed, head buried in his hands. I recognized the haircut, the torn sleeves of a shirt I used to love. B stood in the doorway, her hand half raised, like she wanted to reach out but didn't know how. That week. I remembered it now. The bullying at school. The laughter. The feeling of being small. I hadn't told anyone. Not even her. But she'd known anyway. The timestamp, September 22, 2012, 9:17 p.m. My vision blurred. The room spun slightly. B hadn't just taken photos, she'd documented care. I lifted the camera a third time. My voice came out shaky. One more. The final image formed slowly, agonizingly. I could smell the chemicals on the air, faintly sweet, almost floral. It was me again, older, lying on the same bed, asleep. The night before Christmas. I recognized the shirt, the cheap wine on the nightstand, the phone charging beside me. I remembered arriving late that night, too tired to talk. I thought B had already gone to bed. But in the photo, she was standing in the doorway, smiling softly. In her hand, she held the Polaroid. December 25, 2024, 11:56 p.m. She'd taken that picture herself. My knees felt weak. I sat down, all three photographs trembling in my hands, 1999, 2012, 2024. The same room. The same presence. The same love looping through time, refusing to let go. I spread them on the bed in a neat line. The past staring back at me like a mirror that remembered more than I did. The house sighed, a long, low sound that seemed to travel through the walls. I looked up at the ceiling. "You never stopped watching, did you?" A faint creak answered. Somewhere in the hall, a picture frame rattled against the wall, a tiny, polite acknowledgement. The fear that had ruled me for days started to thin out, replaced by something heavier but softer. Grief, maybe. Gratitude. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The Polaroid felt warm again in my hands. It was almost comforting now, like a pulse against my palm. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, smudging the tears and dust together. "Okay," I said quietly. "What else do you need to show me?" The camera's red button flickered faintly, click, a small response, like it understood. I stood up, the floorboards creaking beneath me, and turned toward the hallway. That was when I noticed it, the faint scent of aftershave drifting through the air. My grandfather's scent. The same kind B had kept on the bathroom shelf for 20 years after he died. The smell grew stronger near the door. "Arthur." I whispered without meaning to. The word hung in the air. Then the Polaroid clicked on its own. I gasped, heart pounding, but the motor stopped before a photo emerged, as if it had changed its mind. The red light blinked once. Then went still. Whatever came next was waiting. The house had fallen completely silent again. No pipes. No clock. No wind. Only my heartbeat, too fast, too loud, echoing in the hollow air. The faint scent of aftershave still lingered, drifting through the hallway like smoke that didn't belong to fire. I followed it. The corridor stretched longer than I remembered. The walls were lined with old photographs in gold frames, family portraits, wedding pictures, faded Polaroids from decades ago. Bea and Arthur on their wedding day. Bea holding me as a baby. My parents at Christmas, all laughter and light before everything changed. As I passed, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In each frame, every smiling face seemed to turn just slightly, as though their eyes followed me. I told myself it was the shadows. The light shifting with my movement. But the feeling crawled beneath my skin all the same. The Polaroid hung heavy around my neck. The red shutter light blinked once, faint, expectant. I raised it. "All right," I whispered. "Show me." The sound filled the corridor like a breath released after years of holding back. The photograph slid out slowly, curling as it developed. I waited. The image came to life, colors bleeding through pale chemical fog. The hallway. This same hallway. But not empty. Bea stood halfway down, her cardigan hanging loose, one hand brushing the wallpaper as if steadying herself. She was mid-step, frozen in motion, eyes soft, mouth curved. Beside her was a man. He wasn't fully there, his outline blurred, transparent, but his posture familiar. Broad shoulders. The way he tilted slightly toward her. Arthur. My throat tightened. They were walking together. Hand in hand. At the bottom of the photo, in pale handwriting that hadn't been there before, the words appeared slowly, like ink forming underwater. "We're okay. You can rest now." I felt the air leave my lungs. The Polaroid slipped from my hand and fluttered to the floor. I knelt, fingers shaking as I picked it up again. The words gleamed faintly, still wet, like they'd been written moments ago. "Grandma," my voice cracked. Are you trying to tell me goodbye?" No answer. Only the stillness. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind me came the soft creak of a floorboard. I turned fast. Nothing. Another creak. Closer this time. I could smell it again, lavender and aftershave, blended together, unmistakable. That old smell of Sunday mornings and warm coffee. I swallowed hard. "If you're here, I'm listening." The camera gave a small click, even though I hadn't touched it. I lifted it slowly, heart hammering in my chest. A new photo began to emerge on its own, sliding out inch by inch. This one felt different. Heavier. The air around me grew colder as it developed, the temperature dropping so fast that I could see my breath. When the image cleared, I nearly dropped it. It showed the same hallway, same wallpaper, same frames, but now empty. Completely empty. Except for the handwriting again. This time, Messier. Shaky. "We're leaving. Don't be afraid." The ink shimmered faintly under the dim light, like it was still drying. Tears burned behind my eyes. I sank to my knees, clutching both photographs to my chest. "You were never haunting me, were you?" I whispered. "You were, showing me how to let go." The silence around me felt almost warm now. A presence that wasn't heavy anymore, just there, surrounding, soft. The Polaroid's motor gave one last low whir, then fell quiet. I waited. Nothing. Then a new sound, faint, rhythmic, almost impossible to hear over the pounding of my pulse. Footsteps. Slow, measured, gentle. I turned my head toward the other end of the hall. The light flickered once, dimmed, then brightened again. And there they were. Not in a photograph. Not behind glass. But there. Bea and Arthur stood at the end of the corridor, hand in hand, their outlines faint but visible in the trembling light. She smiled, that same patient, forgiving smile. He looked straight at me, and I swear I felt the warmth of that gaze. The air shimmered between us, like heat above a road in summer. Then, slowly, they turned. Walked toward the window at the end of the hall. And disappeared into the light. The scent of lavender and aftershave lingered, then thinned. The clock downstairs began to chime, 6 notes, slow and even. I stood there, unable to move. My hands shook around the camera. "Thank you," I said softly. "For not leaving me alone." The red light on the Polaroid blinked once more, click, and a final photo slid out on its own. I stared at it as it developed. It showed the same hallway. Me, standing exactly where I was now, tears on my face, the photos in my hands. And behind me, faint, almost invisible, 2 figures, holding each other, glowing softly like memory made visible. The timestamp read, October 31st, 2025, 5:17 a.m. The last photo B would ever send. The camera's red light flickered once more, then went out. And for the first time since she died, the silence felt kind. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The house felt lighter now, as if some invisible pressure had finally lifted. The scent of lavender still lingered faintly, but it wasn't heavy anymore, it was soft, like a memory whispering I'm still here. The Polaroid hung from its strap against my chest, motionless and cool. I ran my thumb along its edge, feeling the scratches in the plastic, the years etched into it like veins. All around me, the house creaked, small sounds, harmless now. The kind of noises I'd grown up with. But then I realized something. The grandfather clock hadn't chimed again. Time had stopped. The second hand had frozen mid-tick, pointing straight up like a blade caught in hesitation. I looked down at the floor, at the photos spread across the wood, 8 pieces of my life and death intertwined. B and Arthur in the hall. The boy I'd been. The man I'd become. Every image carried the same invisible thread, her presence, constant, patient, watching. My chest tightened. I felt something between sadness and peace, as if both emotions were trying to occupy the same space. The morning light crawled slowly through the window, stretching long across the floorboards. It was a new day, but the air still felt paused, suspended somewhere between before and after. I sank onto the bed, holding the last photograph. The one from the hall. My reflection looked back at me, eyes swollen, tired, alive. And behind me, faintly, 2 shapes. B. Arthur. Watching. "You did it," I whispered. "You finally showed me." The silence pressed close around me again, but it wasn't empty. It was listening. Then I saw it, a small, dark square on the ceiling above the bed. Perfectly centered. I frowned. I hadn't noticed it before. I stood on the mattress, balancing carefully, and looked up. The mark was faint, almost invisible, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A patch of discoloration, about the size of the Polaroid lens. I reached up and brushed my fingers across it. Cold. So cold it burned. And then the Polaroid in my hand gave a soft click. I froze. The sound filled the room again, deliberate, slow, like the camera was taking its time with this one. A final photograph slid out. I stared at it without touching it, terrified of what I might see, or what I might not. The photo lay there, white and blank at first. Slowly, faint colors began to surface. The ceiling. The dark patch. And something written across it, faint, gray, almost carved into the light itself. Place, above. Purpose, to see. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. It wasn't describing what was there. It was describing what it had been doing all along. Watching. Not haunting. Not warning. Watching. The Polaroid hadn't been cursed. It had been keeping record. Preserving something no one else could, not just faces or rooms, but intentions. Love. Protection. Memory itself. I sat back down slowly, holding the photo to my chest. The weight that had been pressing on me since the night Bea died began to ease. "You were never trying to scare me," I whispered. "You were making sure I remembered." The camera lay quiet now, its red light dark and still. The plastic felt colder than ever, yet somehow gentler, as though it had finally finished its work. I gathered all the photographs and spread them across the bed. 8 pieces of film, each telling a chapter of the same story: guilt, forgiveness, and something beyond both. Outside, the sky was lightening. Birds began to sing, distant but clear. The house seemed to breathe again. A small breeze moved through the curtains, brushing the edge of one photograph off the bed. It floated to the floor, landing face up. The first one, me asleep, taken from above. The timestamp glowed faintly again, though the room was too bright for that to be possible. October 31st, 2025, 3:33 a.m. A perfect circle. Beginning and end. I smiled, small and tired. The Polaroid lay beside me on the blanket. I placed my hand over it gently. "You can rest now." The camera didn't respond. No hum, no sound. Just silence, complete and full. Then, faintly, from somewhere far away, I heard Bea's voice. Not loud, not even distinct, just the tone. Warm. Familiar. A hum. The same hymn she used to sing when I was a child. "Bring the wandering home." The air grew warmer. The weight in my chest dissolved. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. The Polaroid had stopped taking pictures. It didn't need to anymore. Because everything that mattered, every proof of love, every piece of forgiveness, was already developed. Right here. The morning light had fully entered the room now, soft, golden, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. For the first time since I'd arrived, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt awake. I sat on the bed, the 8 photos spread neatly in front of me. Their edges overlapped like puzzle pieces forming a quiet truth. Each one told a part of her story, and mine. The Polaroid rested on the nightstand, still and silent. Its surface reflected the sunlight like glass. I could almost see my face in it, tired, hollow-eyed, but lighter somehow. I exhaled. The sound came out shaky but full. That's when I saw my phone on the dresser. The screen was black, but I knew what waited inside it. A voicemail I had never finished listening to. The last thing Bea had ever said to me. For months, I couldn't bring myself to hear it. Now. I needed to. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked the phone. The old message sat at the top of the list, dated April 2nd, 2025, the day before she died. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft, grainy, so familiar it hurt. "Hi, darling. It's me. Just calling to say hello." A small laugh, that nervous little exhale she always did when pretending not to cry. "I know you're busy. That's all right. I just wanted you to know, no matter how long it takes, no matter if you can't come by, I love you. I'm always going to love you. And I'm proud of you. Very proud. All right? All right. Bye, sweetheart. See you soon." The message ended. For a moment, all I could hear was static, the quiet kind, like air in a church. Then the silence returned, gentle and whole. I hadn't realized I was crying until I tasted salt. The tears weren't violent this time. They came steady, like something finally unclogging after years of trying not to. I let them fall. "I love you too," I whispered. "Thank you for letting me find you again." The room seemed to hum, faint, alive. A shadow of lavender drifted through the air, curling above the bed. The scent wrapped around me, not sharp anymore, but soft, like the final touch of a memory before it fades. The photos caught the sunlight, glowing faintly. The one from the hallway shimmered most, Bea and Arthur walking together, hand in hand, smiling at something just outside the frame. "You got where you were going," I said. "I think I did too." The clock in the hallway began to tick again. Not loud, just steady. Time had restarted. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt. The air felt lighter now, the house no longer pressing in from all sides. I could breathe without the weight of guilt pulling at each inhale. The Polaroid still sat motionless on the nightstand. I reached out and placed my hand over it one last time. The plastic was cool, still, peaceful. "You can rest now." A faint click sounded from inside the camera. So soft I almost missed it. The red light blinked once. Then faded out completely. Gone. The smell of lavender deepened for one last heartbeat. Then, nothing. Just the morning. Just the world, continuing. I gathered the photos carefully and slid them into Bea's old album, the one labeled Family. They fit perfectly in the last empty page, as though the space had been waiting for them all along. I closed the book and ran my hand over the leather cover. The dust caught the light and rose briefly before disappearing into the sunbeam. Downstairs, the kettle began to whistle faintly, though I hadn't turned it on. I smiled. All right. I'll make coffee." The whistle stopped. Later, I stood in the front doorway, the cool air brushing against my face. The oaks in the yard rustled gently. The house behind me was quiet but not empty anymore. It breathed again. I thought about the night I'd first arrived, how heavy the silence had been. How much I'd hated the way it listened. Now it felt different. Warm. Patient. A silence that didn't demand anything from me. I looked down at the Polaroid in my hand. I'd brought it with me out of habit, but as the wind shifted, I realized I didn't need it anymore. It had done its job. The lens caught a reflection of the morning sky, pale blue, limitless. "Thank you," I said softly. "For showing me what I couldn't see on my own." I placed the camera on the windowsill beside the old clock. The time read 6 a.m. exactly. The chime began, slow, steady, 6 echoes filling the house one by one. With each note, the light grew warmer, brighter. By the last chime, I wasn't crying anymore. The smell of lavender lingered, faint and sweet. I closed the door behind me and stepped into the morning. The world felt different now, lighter, quieter, but alive. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. If this story reached something inside you, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this Polaroid can travel. Because maybe, somewhere out there, another memory is waiting to be found.